Well, hello there. Welcome to the 57th installment of Coffee Break Blogging. In this one, we are going to talk about the colors that you use on your blog and how to kind of think about it. Here's the thing. Most people, when they decide what colors to use on a blog, they only think about it in terms of what they think personally looks nice. And that's fine. That's definitely what I have done a lot of in the past as well. So I'm definitely not going to blame anybody for that. However, there is a little bit more of a strategic way to think about it, and that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, and we're going to run through them here, is the psychology of color. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, the thing is, you probably know this instinctively, is that different colors sometimes will bring up different emotions or reactions to them. And it's helpful to know what those things are. They're not set in stone because every human being is different, but there tends to be an average that you will see. And as I go through them, you will see this as well. So let's go ahead and run through some of these. The first color is black. Now, black is often used to communicate the idea of power or prestige, or the idea of sophistication. You probably have seen this before. Sometimes you'll see, on commercials for luxury cars or something. A lot of times they will use blacks, or they'll have like a logo just shown on a simple black background. The whole idea there is to communicate prestige and sophistication, stuff like that. Now, in some cultures, they tend to associate it more with death and disease and things like that. But we're talking about our target market, and where you are probably a member of as well. And unless that would come to mind for you, then it's probably okay to use. Now, the other thing too with black is that it's often used as a highlight color or to go along with other things, because black pretty much goes with any other color. So black is probably something that you are going to use in your blog as long as you know what you're doing. But in the US, it's typically referred to or used as a power and sophistication or a wealth idea of black. Now let's look at white. Now white, you see a lot of white space on blogs, and this is great. It gives that sense of space, and that's very, very important. And most blogs should be using an awful lot of white. But the other thing, just as a color in and of itself, is many times seen to communicate simplicity or innocence or purity. The idea of something being clean. A lot of times with commercials where they're for a cleaning supply or something, you'll see white, and they'll have that little ding, on the countertop, like it's all nice and clean. Or you'll see that Apple a lot of times will use plain white. Their guys, when they do their major releases, the guys are showing up on a plain white background. A lot of people try to copy that with their videos, but it's giving forth that sense of simplicity and cleanliness and purity, which is definitely something that goes into the Apple brand. That's how they want people to feel that way when they're using Apple products. So it kind of makes sense. Now, the next color is red. Now, red is an emotional color. It is one of those colors that can mean different things to different people. For some people, it will refer to the idea of love and passion and things like that. Some people, they associate it with anger. But it is an emotionally intense color, and it's one that you pretty much wouldn't want to use unless what you're talking about is of that nature. If you're in the a love type market or a dating market, and you're speaking primarily to women, you might want to have some red going on because it would fit that market. But that is kind of the general idea that comes up when people see red. Now let's move on to blue. Happens to be my favorite color, actually. Now blue is usually preferred by men. But that's just an average, and I happen to be one, so that makes a lot of sense why it's my favorite color. But it tends to evoke a sense of calmness, a sense of trust, and a sense of orderliness. It tends to be a trust color. And so you'll find a lot of corporations will incorporate blue. People who are trying to look official a lot of times will use blue. And I think that the idea of calmness probably comes from the ocean and being at the beach or something, but a lot of times blue will evoke that sense of calmness. So you have to look at what you're doing with your brand and your material, and if those are emotions that you want to evoke, then you might want to work some blue into it. Now, green is another color that is often associated with the idea of nature. And it can also be used to refer to the idea of luck, to money, to peace. These types of things. You'll find very often, if you're in the natural health space, you'll see a lot of green. Makes sense, right? The idea of green products. Now, so you need to look at what you're doing, and if what you're doing fits into those types of ideas of peacefulness, health, wealth, luck, then you might want to work some green into your design. Now, yellow is a very cheery color, a very warm color. It's also kind of a tiring color to look at. It's kind of loud on the eyes. So what I recommend is that yellow not be used unless you're using it as an action color, as a color that's designed to pull the person's eyes over to it and get them to click on something. But in terms of it being a primary color of your site, it's generally not a good idea. The other thing too is just you put almost anything on top of yellow, like any text or anything like that, and the contrast is just ugly and it's really hard to read in many cases. So yellow is primarily going to be used as a highlight color, and that's pretty much it. Now, moving on to purple. Purple is typically a color that's used around the idea of wealth and a lot of times royalty. Now, the thing is, many of us are probably not dealing with those kinds of things, but if you have a product where you have some kind of a theme around it based around royalty or wealth or exclusivity, something like that, then some type of purple worked into it might actually work out well for you. Sometimes it can be used to refer to the idea of spirituality or wisdom as well. Now, brown is a strength color. It's a color of reliability. It's not a color I like to see a lot of on the internet, to be quite honest with you. But sometimes I've seen it be used effectively when it comes to, like UPS has brown, right? And one of the big things they want is that sense of reliability, that you can trust UPS to get the job done. I've also seen brown be used in areas of natural health or something to do with nature. And it kind of makes sense. It also kind of goes along with green, so that works out well. Orange is another one of those colors, very similar to yellow, that you don't generally want to use a lot of on your site. It's just not a good color except as an action color. So you want to use it as a highlight for calls to action, but not as the primary color of your site generally. And then lastly is pink. Now, pink, you probably know this already. Pink is primarily a feminine color. It is for things like love, and it can also evoke a sense of calmness, but generally among females, because most guys just don't really care for pink, to be honest with you. So if you are catering primarily to a female audience, especially if you're dealing with something along the lines of love, dating, any like those types of topics, then pink might definitely work into your brand, and that works out totally fine, and it would make a lot of sense. So that's a general idea of the psychology of colors. I was actually looking here out of my latest action plan over the Academy, where I have a lot of that information documented. Now, with all that said and done, I bumped my mic. With regard to your colors, you need to look at your brand, the image that you want to portray, and the market that you're serving, and you want to then think about, okay, what colors make the most sense here? You'll notice if you go over to the Blog Marketing Academy that blue is definitely one of the colors that I use. Well, as I said, blue tends to be a color for trust, for orderliness, for calmness, for simplicity. These are things that I want to be associated with the Blog Marketing Academy, because internet marketing is a very complicated, vast topic, and I want people to feel like they come to the Blog Marketing Academy and get a sense of order from it and a sense of trust. So therefore, it happens to be my favorite color. That did play a factor in why I picked it, but it also evokes those things. And then there's black and grays and white for a lot of white space, and black tends to be a good complement color, so it works along with it. So again, white space, very important. Make sure you use plenty of spacing around different elements on your blog. White space is important because we all have an innate psychological need for space, okay? So give it to them with regard to white space. When it comes to your text, don't play around with having different color backgrounds. I believe personally that you need to use white background for your text and then put black text on top of it. And if you're not going to go exactly black, if you're going to use a shade of gray, it needs to be a very dark gray. You need to have high contrast between the text and the background behind it. And if you flip it around and put white text on black, it's just a lot more difficult to read. So I don't recommend that you do that. Okay. Now, lastly, and I did mention this, I believe, in episode 55, where we talked about flowing attention, but it's the idea of having an action color on your blog. And that action color would be one that is used as a highlight for calls to action to attract the eye and make it very obvious that that is what you want somebody to do. Now, as we went through that color list earlier, there are two colors that I recommend you not use a lot of except as highlights. And those were yellow and orange. Those two colors happen to make really good action colors. And many times people will blend them together into like a shade of gold, or they'll have this gradient between the two. And you'll notice this a lot with call to action buttons and add to carts and things like that. It makes a really good action color. Now, you can use other colors for an action color, but yellow, gold, orange, those types of things tend to be pretty common, and that's why. But you want to have a action color for your blog, one that you don't use in any other place except for where you want people to click. And it kind of more or less gets people used to it. It's also going to bring their eyeballs to it and make them click on it, which is something you want more people to do, obviously. Okay, so that is how we're going to talk about striking the right color balance on your blog. Hopefully you found that interesting, and it's something that maybe you'll go and look at your existing blog and maybe make a few tweaks. And if you don't know how to do it, you can get help on that. A lot of times it comes down to just a few basic style sheet edits. It's really not as complicated as you probably think. And you can always come over to the Academy at blogmarketingacademy.com and just shoot us an email via the contact form. Maybe I can jump in if it's a really quickie and help you out there, okay? Once again, if you want to dive deeper with this about really tweaking your blog for optimum conversions, optimum sales, and the lowest bounce rate, then I recommend you check out my latest action plan that I've been mentioning for the last few episodes here, and it's called the Perfect Blog Blueprint. And if you want to dive deeper on that, you can explore it over at blogmarketingacademy.com/blog blueprint. Okay? Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in a few days with episode 58 of Coffee Break Blogging. See you then.